So I have heard the Hajj Sutra chanted in many languages: Tibetan, Sanskrit, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, Japanese, but this is the first time in Hebrew. So thank you very much. So over these next few days we are going to go through this short text by Palden Atisha. For any of you who don't know, Palden Atisha was a Bengali Pandit or scholar of the 9th, 10th centuries. He was born actually in what is nowadays Bangladesh, and he studied for many years. He also spent many years in Indonesia, where he went to look for teachers. And he basically was the foremost scholar of his day in India, in Buddhist circles. And his fame was such that his name was known even in Tibet. And of course Tibet in those days really was a very remote country, and also very wild and woolly, you know. India was much more sophisticated. The Tibetans were regarded as red-faced barbarians. And so Atisha was invited to come to Tibet because Tibet at that time had been going through a lot of political turmoil, and the Dharma had decreased in its application. People were very confused, and there was a lot of problems there at that time. So they invited Atisha to come to sort them out a bit. But he was by this time about 60 years old, I think, 50 or 60. And so he said, no, it's too difficult and it's too far, I'm too old. But meantime, in Western Tibet, where he had been invited to come by the king, whose name was Yishi-er, Yishi-er was that part of the country that was then invaded, and the king was imprisoned and put to ransom. So then his son, Chanchu, raised the ransom in gold to pay for the release of his father. But then the king said, look, I'm old anyway. It doesn't matter. You don't need to ransom me. Take this gold which you have collected to India and present it to Atisha and ask him again, please, you come to Tibet. So then they did that. The king was beheaded, and they took the ransom money to Atisha and said, look, the king has sacrificed his life in order that you should come to Tibet. So what could poor Atisha do? So he went to Tibet, and very fortunately for Tibet, and he spent the last 10 years of his life there. I have to say that, originally I thought Atisha was kind of boring compared with much more exciting lamas they have there, like Milarepa and so forth. But now I recognize that really, I think he was the salvation of Tibetan Buddhism. At that time, the Tantra had spread throughout much of Asia. You see remains of it in Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, these images and temples dedicated to Tantra. But in all those countries, it eventually died out because it became, frankly, it became quite degenerate. And as in India today, the word Tantra is associated with magic, and especially black magic. And actually, it could go either way. And so in most of these Asian countries, it degenerated into just, you know, getting more wealth, getting the woman you wanted, getting power. And so then it was eventually replaced by what appeared to be a more pure stream of Buddhism, the Theravada. But in Tibet, this didn't happen. And I think it's because Atisha came and he gave a lot of emphasis on refuge and on bodhicitta, on the reason why we are practicing, which is not just to gain more power, more fulfilling our worldly desires, making samsara more comfortable. That we are practicing in order to awaken so that we can genuinely be of benefit to the world. And so along with this came what are called the Lojong teachings, which means literally mind training, but really has to do with changing our attitude towards life. All the challenges and difficulties which come up in our life, how to take those onto the path and use everything that happens to us, pain, loss, suffering, difficulties with other people, and difficulties with our own mind, and how to take all of that and instead of seeing these as an obstacle on the path, recognizing that this is our great opportunity to transform our attitudes and use everything that happens to us as a means of progress on the path for the sake of all beings. So this teaching infiltrated through in Tibet at a very crucial time when Tibet could have gone either way. And Atisha himself and his disciples, they formed something called the Kadampa tradition, which eventually evolved into the Gelugpa tradition. However, Gampopa, who was a direct disciple, the main disciple of Milarepa back there, the green guy, Gampopa, who was the father of the various Kajupa traditions, he was a Kadampa monk. And so then he combined the Kadampa teachings with the yogic teachings which he received from Milarepa to form the Kajupa lineages. So the Kaju lineages also took on board all the Kadampa teachings. And likewise in the Sakya and the Nyingmapa too, in time everybody practiced these very precious Kadampa teachings which stemmed from Palden Atisha. So the whole of Tibetan Buddhism is very indebted to Palden Atisha for these. He believed, go back to the beginning again. You know, at that time there was a lot of, you see it in Milarepa also, a lot of emphasis on, well, we will deal with it when we get to it in his text, but a lot of supernatural powers. You know, everyone's very impressed with people who could fly and walk on water. And so Atisha was saying that's not the point, you know. Really the most important point is how we are dealing with our mind and how we are purifying our negative emotions and how much genuine compassion motivates all our actions. And so this emphasis on this, everybody knew this, of course, already. It wasn't something new. But he really put it there that get your foundations right. Once the foundations are strong, then the rest of the building will come up quite easily and be stable. But if we have very shaky foundations, then the building will not endure. And it will be very... it will not be strong. So, therefore, Atisha is in at the heart of all the traditions nowadays and is equally respected. He doesn't belong to anybody in particular, he belongs to everybody. So here he was asked by 3 or 4 of his main disciples, to talk about what is most essential, because as we know, Tibetan Buddhism is very vast and has many, many aspects. So on the one hand, this is its richness. It reminds me sort of like of a Dharma supermarket. You go in there and there's so much, how do you decide what to select? So this is its richness is in its varieties, but on the other hand, of course, it can become very bewildering and we can become very confused because it's hard to know which to choose. And so therefore, this deals with let's get back down to the basics. Let's get back down to what really matters. And then the rest will come up with itself naturally. It will just follow once we have got deep roots in our basic attitude and our basic practice. So therefore his disciples, his chief disciples, said, what matters most? That's what they were asking, really. What are the most important things that we should remember? And so this is his answer. For some reason, it's not a very well-known text in Tibetan Buddhism. I somehow came across his translation. I thought, wow, this really is quite fantastic. But then I was trying to find the Tibetan of it. And I had our Tibetan teachers looking also. And they couldn't find it. But eventually it was discovered somewhere. So I have the Tibetan, because sometimes the English is not clear. You're thinking, what's that in Tibetan? So it helps to have the original so that you can just check up what it really was the meaning here for the key terms. Anyway, it's a very nice text because it's very simple. And but it's very to the point, of course. So, and it's very nice because we have 4 days, so we can take it quite leisurely, and it will also allow us time for questions. So this is also very good. So he drops us right in at the deep end, right at the start. Here we sink or swim. The supreme understanding. The word for understanding in Tibetan is kepa. Kepa means learning, understanding, etc. It has this idea of learning also and kind of wisdom. The supreme understanding is to realize the meaning of selflessness. Is there anybody here who doesn't really know anything about Buddhism? Is there anybody here who knows lots and lots about Buddhism? They can come up and give a talk at this point. That's it. We'll keep quiet. That's the best answer to that one. Yes. The Buddha Dharma is based on 3 pillars. That our ordinary conditioned existence is naturally unsatisfactory, dukkha. That everything conditioned is impermanent and changing, anicca, and that nothing has any self-existence from its own side, anatma. So these are the three signs of being which are in all Buddhist schools. Sometimes as Buddhism went to many different countries, it took on, Buddhism is very adaptive. Unlike certain religions, it doesn't expect everyone to adapt to it. It adapts to other cultures. And so therefore, after 1,000 years of being in many, many different places, when one looks at the externals, it looks very different. If you go to Buddhism in Japan or China, Vietnam, or Sri Lanka, Thailand, or Tibet, outwardly it all looks very, very different. They have different languages, different ways of chanting. The monks and nuns wear different uniforms. And in general, so much looks very, very different. But when we scratch under the surface of the cultural changes which have adaptations which have happened, we find this very solid core of Buddhist understanding which everyone is agreed on. And at the heart of that is dukkha, anicca, anatma. All Buddhist schools hold to this. So because of that, I think, Atisha puts it at the beginning, that the supreme understanding is to realize the meaning of selflessness. Now later on he talks again about the supreme wisdom is not to grasp onto anything as the self. This is what does it mean? What does it mean? Well, people spend 20 years debating this one, so you know, we're going to get a 5-minute quickie. First of all, I think it's important to think about what the Buddha meant by Atma, self. This is especially important when one is talking in India or among people of Hindu persuasions, because probably contemporary with the Buddha, or just after the Buddha, arose the Upashanic schools, which posited an ultimate self, Atma, big letters radiating lights, with the ultimate, Brahman. So when the Buddha says, when they read an-atman, no atman, they are taking it to mean that there is no ultimate beyond our ordinary everyday self. And therefore, to them, it appears to be something very negative and nihilistic. But if one looks in the earlier canon, in the Pali canon, one sees that the Buddha actually was always refuting or debating with Vedic Buddhism. That is the Buddhism of the rituals. Huh? Oh, Vedic Hinduism. Yes, sorry. Yes, Vedic Hinduism, which has a lot to do with ritual. And the Brahmin, the Hindu gods of that time were the gods of the Vedas, like Brahma and Indra and so forth. These were very early gods. Just as in the Bible, they talk about the early gods that refuted. So likewise, the Buddha was dealing with these early Vedic gods and with the Vedic rituals. That's what he was debating. He wasn't talking about the Upashanic schools, which apparently weren't around at his time, or at least he didn't know about them. So when he's using the word Atma, he's not using it from the point of view of modern Hinduism, which is using it in the point of view, they say Atma is Satchidanand, which means like being, and Satchit, mind, intelligence, and bliss. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about self, Atma, in the sense of our sense of self. And this is what he was refuting. He was saying that is not who we really are. And that is our mistake. So this is what we're dealing with. When he says there is no self, he is not saying we don't exist. But he's saying we don't exist the way we think we exist. The things which we identify with are impermanent. They're all going to fall apart. Therefore, he analyzed our sense of self into these 5 components or 5 skandhas, our form and our perception and the feeling that we get from our perception, and then the mental composites, our memory, our ideas, all that stuff which we put together when we perceive something with our senses. From that we get a feeling about it, then we put it together and we create our whole, what we're going to do about it. Now we've seen it and felt about it. I see this, and if I decide that I like it, I don't like it, and then what one is going to do about the fact that one likes it or doesn't like it. And all this is held together by the consciousness, the 6th consciousness. So there are 5 consciousnesses, our eye conscious, nose conscious, ear conscious, and touch and taste. And then what they perceive, you get a feeling of pleasure or displeasure from it, or neutral feeling. I like it, I don't like it, neutral. And then one starts to fill out the picture, right? It's very important to understand how this works. I mean, neurology, modern neuroscience has agreed on this. What our senses actually perceive is actually very rough. For example, our sense perception does not see blue. It just sees a kind of color. It's the mind which says blue. Do you understand? I mean, they've proved that if you see something, you just see a rough image which comes in through the eye sense. Then it's picked up. There is this subtle feeling of pleasure or pain or neutrality. Then the mind catches hold of it and labels it and says it recognizes it. Right? It says mug. Now the eye is not saying mug, right? The eye just sees a sort of vague color and shape. But the mind then clicks in and says mug, and then adds all the things that we have about mugs, one way or the other, right? It elaborates enormously. But this is all moving, moment to moment, and changing. It's not something static. It's not someone sitting in the background making the decisions. And that's our mistake. We think that behind the sense organ, the perception, and the feeling tones, and the mental compositions of putting it together and labeling it, that there is someone there who is perceiving and labeling and deciding they like it and they don't like it. Right? There's me. I am sitting there deciding. And so this is something really very radical, if you think about it. The Buddha said that that sense of me, which is enduring, existing from its own side, unchanging and fundamental, is our basic delusion. Because if we look for this self-existing, unchanging I, we will never find it. So when Buddhism talks about the roots of the negative roots, the roots of the afflictive emotions, which are greed, grasping, attachment, and aversion, anger, hatred, and so all the unpleasant emotions, which are based on ignorance, this ignorance is dealing with this fundamental unknowing that the mind naturally reifies everything. Reify means it makes it into a thing. But if we look for that thing in itself, we never can find it. The mind is very clever, and it creates what appears to be our external reality and our internal reality. But if we analyze it and look for it, it can never be found. And this non-finding is what is meant basically by emptiness. It doesn't mean that nothing exists. It means that things don't exist the way we see them, as something solid, unchanging, real. So this is a very, very fundamental premise on which the whole Buddhist view is based, and it's what is based with the Heart Sutra, right, that you just quoted. It's not saying that nothing exists. That would be nihilism. But it's also saying that things don't exist statically, solidly, the way they appear to us, which would be the other extreme. The Buddha taught the middle way, that everything arises in interdependence with many, many things at the same time. Many causes and conditions arise to create what appears to us to be something solid, real, and enduring. So in this day and age, it's good because we have science as a backup. Previously, either people believed this because they had studied it for many, many years and debated it, or because they had actually realized this in their practice, or best of all, both. But nowadays, why His Holiness the Dalai Lama is so fascinated by science is because science is ratifying what Buddhists have known for a millennium. So science also is very fascinated by Buddhism. How did you know that? Without machines. And His Holiness says, how did you know that? Without meditating. And they both come to the same thing, that everything comes together due to causes and conditions, and nothing has any self-existence, just as it is from its own side. And so this is a very important, a very, very, very important insight in Buddhism. I mean, it's something which is very obvious. Like, we take this mug. Now, if I it's full of water. So if I threw it, the mug, people would not only get wet, but also, if they got hit by the mug, it would give them a bruise. So it's not non-existing, right? It does exist, but it doesn't exist exactly the way it appears to exist, because if we look for the thing in itself, even from a scientific point of view, we can never find it, right? It goes down into atoms, and then atoms into protons and protons and neutrons into something else. And every time you look and look and look, but you can never find the actual thing in itself. It all exists only due to various interrelationships coming together in that moment to make it appear from our side with the kind of senses we have to be how it appears to us at this moment. But the point is always to look for the thing in itself, and the thing in itself we can never find. So this is not only cups and mugs, but very much has to do with us. And a very important part of meditation, once the mind has become calm and focused, is to turn it in on itself and look at the mind. And then when we're looking at the mind, to think who is thinking. And then we say, well, I am thinking, wonderful, who am I? And then really to strip layer after layer like an onion, looking for this essential I who is looking. And if one searches for the mind in itself, it cannot be found. But just to say that doesn't help. One needs to really sincerely look, because it's in the looking that comes the transformation. Merely saying it just gives an idea. But this insight of the Buddha was very profound, and it's what made him a Buddha. All his deep levels of meditation that he went through prior to his enlightenment, going back through all his past lives, the past lives of all beings in the universe, etc., he still was in samsara. It was only when he went beyond that and understood interdependent origination that he recognized that now he was enlightened. So this question of selflessness, right, the thing is that we are identifying with all the wrong things. It doesn't mean that on a conventional level we don't exist. Obviously, on a conventional level we do exist. We exist the way we think we exist. But on an ultimate level, all the things which we normally identify ourselves with is exactly who we're not. So, if one says, who are you? Then normally one gives one's name. And then if one gives one's profession, one's country, one's race, one's family, where one's family came from, one's gender, of course, and so on. Asking, who am I? Well, I'm so-and-so, and I live in so-and-so, and I've studied to be a such and such. And my family comes from so-and-so, and I had a happy childhood. I had a miserable childhood. My marriages have all been hopeless. My relationships are awful. Oh, I have a wonderful time with everybody. I mean, this is how we identify ourselves, right? With our memories, with our opinions, what music we like, what art we like, whether we like it cold or hot and so forth. All our opinions, our endless opinions. our beliefs. That's a nice one here. What do we believe in? Our religion, our race. Very strong identification, not just the Israel, everywhere. And it's all thought, isn't it? It's all thoughts. Our memories, our dreams, our fantasies, our aspirations, our hopes, our fears, our ideas of who we are. It's all thoughts. So thoughts, we swim in an ocean of thoughts. I mean, people die for their beliefs. They kill for their beliefs. Heaven knows. And yet, what is a belief? It's a thought, a series of thoughts put together, which we then grasp and cling to and say, this is me. So this is why it's very important to recognize what is a thought. We live in our thinking. So what is a thought? And as I say, who is thinking? So this is a very fundamental practice to recognize how almost everything that we do and say is based on thinking. Our external reality is based on our thoughts. Our internal reality is all thoughts. And yet we never ask ourselves, what is a thought? It's like we're playing the movie, projecting it out there. But we never ask ourselves, well, what is that actually is a movie? You know, all these little transparent frames going very fast with the light shining through it. But we don't think of that. When we go to a movie, we just get entranced by the movie. We're not stopping to think about what it really is. Isn't it? And because of that, we suffer. Because we believe it's also real. Real things happening to a real me. And not just that, but that when there is this solid self of I, then there is also going to be a very solid self of other. Everyone else is not me. Everyone else is separate, different. So then there are those who are associated with me, my family, my friends, my people. And that again creates all those people who are not associated with me, who are not my family, not my friends, not my people. I mean, the world is like that. And it all comes from this fundamental ignorance. So then you defend those that belong to you, because those that belong to you are part of me. And we oppose those who don't belong to us because they are not me, and therefore are seen as threatening. I mean, it's the usual cycle. Everywhere. The whole world. And it's all based on this basic ignorance at the root of it all, that we don't recognize who we really are. And not recognizing who we are, we don't recognize who others are either. And so therefore they always appear as something outside of ourselves, something which is threatening. So this understanding of selflessness liberates us. If we recognize it, then it liberates us from this kind of thinking. I and others. We will deal more with the nature of the mind as we go on in his text. But as I say, when the Buddha talks about selflessness, he's not saying we don't exist. Of course we exist, but we don't exist how we normally understand ourselves to exist. The tragedy is that we don't know who we really are, and that we associate with all the things which are transitory. They're not our true nature. This is why, as we grow in wisdom, in genuine understanding, also at the same time great compassion comes, because we recognize our fundamental delusion is the same fundamental delusion which is shared by almost all beings. And how sad. The nature of the mind is what connects us with all beings. But it's like we're stuck in little globules, and we don't recognize. It's like it's like little bubbles. You know, that outside, inside actually are the same, but there's this film which makes it seem like a separate bubble. And we don't recognize, therefore, that we have, at a very deep level, we have a very profound interconnection with all beings. It's only our outer appearance and our conceptual thinking which separates us. So this is why the nature of the mind is compared to the sky, because you can't divide the sky. The sky is just sky. Space is just space. But we can divide what at this point appears to be something solid. Do you understand? Am I making sense here?
Then you can say that there is an I, but it's not a noun, it's a verb actually. You're becoming.
Yes, we're becoming. Constantly becoming, but never being. Exactly. And this is our fundamental unknowing, that we don't understand the situation clearly. And so we're imprisoned in our brains, basically. And we don't connect with the real depths of the mind, which is not synonymous with the brain. The brain is very useful. It's not that the thoughts themselves are a problem. Nobody is asking you to stop thinking. You know, this is not the problem. The problem is we identify with our thinking. If we use the thoughts intelligently, of course, you know, I mean, after the Buddha's enlightenment, you know, he went around for 45 years. He was very organized. He was a prince. And so he knew how to run things. And so he set up not only his dharma, but also the sangha, and the fourfold sangha of monastics and lay, and got everybody very well organized. It wasn't that he went around like a blank zombie. And any enlightened masters that one meets, you know, they're completely bright and intelligent and alive. It's not that they're just spaced out. But the problem is not the thinking. The problem is that we identify with the thinking, and we don't know, we haven't recognized that which goes beyond which underlies the conceptual thinking. So therefore, it's as I say, it's like if you let's see if he deals with this any further. I've forgotten. Anyway, it's like now if you go out, then when you come back in again, even you've only been here, less than an hour, but when you come back in, then you've each got your own seat, right? This is my seat. I mean, seriously. I mean, as anybody knows, who's been to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings in Dharamshala, you better get your own seat. And if anybody takes your seat, there'll be, especially with the Tibetans, and then they sit down for a discussion on compassion. So, this is my seat, right? But the point is that the whole time we are breathing in and breathing out air, which is space, which is sky. And one cannot say, look, excuse me, that's my air. You can't breathe my air. That's my air. We breathe it in, we breathe it out. We share it. It connects us all. We can call it sky, we can call it space, we can call it air. It's the same thing, depending on what context. But we're all here breathing in and breathing out the same air. The trees and the plants are likewise breathing in and breathing out. We're interchanging, we're connecting. And even though it all looks like solid people with solid cushions, of course, that also is just space. So where is space not? Everywhere is space. And so therefore, the nature of the mind, the true nature of the mind, is compared to space. Because space, you cannot grasp it, you cannot say this is my space. And at the same time, it's all pervading, it's everywhere. The whole universe is space. So it's therefore, it's what we all are composed of. And it's also that, therefore, which deeply, intimately connects us. So the mind is, the nature of the mind is compared to space. At the same time, because space also is empty, it's unimpeded. Anything moves through space. It doesn't set up any barriers. So it's unbounded, unimpeded, all pervasive, like the nature of the mind. But at the same time, unlike space, the mind is also conscious, aware. Space is not aware. It's empty, but it's not aware. The mind, of course, is the very nature of awareness. So, therefore, this whole idea, the tendency to solidify and divide, separate, is part of our conceptual thinking. It's part of our relative reality. But ultimately, that it is not like that at all. But as long as we only live in our relative reality, our conventional reality, and we don't know, we haven't experienced the way things really are, then we suffer. We suffer because we cling, we have grasping, attachment, holding on. And we suffer because we have aversion, dislike, pushing away. And it's all based on the fact that we don't see things how they really are. Therefore the Buddha said we are sick. Dukkha. But he also said, no worries. Even though we are sick, this is the reason why we are sick, but we are inherently healthy. The good news is that this is not terminal. We are inherently healthy, and all we need is the way back to our genuine good health again. So this whole question of who we really are is fundamental, because we suffer because we mistake our who we really are. We mistake our identity. And we hold on to and identify with something which is naturally transient and naturally unstable, and we create this being inside us who ultimately is just a facet of our consciousness, but is not our true nature at all. Because as long as we have this sense of a central I, then we're always defending it and trying to please it. And so if we can get beyond that, then everything releases. Everything. It's always talking about freedom, liberation, release. We don't realize what a burden carting around this sense of a separate me, which has to be satisfied and defended the whole time. What a burden that is. So we are trying to get release from that into something so much vaster, which interconnects us with all beings instead of separates us. And because this is the fundamental aspiration on the Buddhist path, therefore Atisha puts it first. It underlies everything else. So therefore, number 2, the supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's own mind. Just a minute, let's see what spiritual discipline, Sunpa. Okay, so again, it says to tame one's own mind stream, actually. Semju. Tsunpicho. Tsunpa is something pure, something noble, something fine, disciplined. In the classical texts, in the written texts, then the word for a nun is Jetsunma, giving the idea of something disciplined, fine, noble, pure. It has all those connotations in that word Tsun. So nowadays, rather than have nuns called Ane, which just means an aunt, and is fairly derogatory in its feeling, it's not respectful. We have agreed, both the Gyalwang Drukpa, the head of our Drukpa Kagyu tradition, and His Holiness the Karmapa also have agreed that from now on nuns will be addressed as Tsunma, not Ane. So we have all our nuns are now called Tsunmas. And so it's the same word that they're using here, Tsunpa. So, where it says the supreme spiritual discipline, it means the supreme discipline, purity, nobility of mind, etc., etc. What is the most important thing for becoming Tsun? Is to tame the mind. Well, obviously. Because so much of our problems are caused by our wild mind. People want to practice meditation, they want to be better people, they want to have an easier life, they want many things when they come to or the spiritual path. But all of it depends on a tamed mind. If you think of a wild horse, then you could look at that horse and think, well, that horse has great potential. It's a beautiful horse, wow. But it's wild. I want it to go this way, it will go that way. I want it to settle down, it will run around. I want it to run around, it will settle down. Because it is out of control. So the first thing, before we can train it and work with it, we have to tame it. And taming, either you can beat it into submission, or you can offer it sugar. Basically, in the end, it's much better to befriend your horse, so that the horse of itself will obey, not because it's been so completely submissive that it doesn't have any, spark in it anymore, or because it's afraid of being punished, but because it is interested and wants to be trained. It thinks, wow, maybe being trained would be fun. So we need to tame our mind. In other words, we need to befriend our mind and convince our mind that being trained would be indeed a lot of fun. People struggle very much with meditation, often, because of trying to force the mind to do something which the mind actually doesn't want to do. For example, if one is reading an interesting book or watching an interesting movie or playing some fascinating computer game, you don't have to force the mind. You have to force the mind away from it. You don't have to force the mind towards it. The mind is happily concentrating and absorbed in the book or the movie or whatever. So this shows that the mind has the capacity to be concentrated and absorbed in something outside of itself. Right? So the question then is how to make our meditation as fascinating to the mind as reading an interesting book. And this is where taming the mind comes in. Because at the beginning, very often, just looking at the ingoing and outgoing of the breath might not be all that terribly riveting after the third breath. Then, breathing in, breathing out. So, we need to work with the mind. We need to work with the mind to make the mind want to be concentrated, want to be focused. And this is why we need to have a lot of patience and a lot of perseverance. My feeling is that, of course, there are two ways to do this. One is the Goenka Vipassana style, where you sit down right from the start and do 10 hours. 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, like this. And then the mind freaks out completely. But after the second or third day, of which most people say the first and second day was a complete hell realm, but by the third day, the mind begins to calm down. And at the end, many people are signing up for the next course. So it does work, and that is one way of doing it. Just throw yourself in the deep end, and then either you're going to sink or swim. Usually, if people leave a Goenka course, it's after the first or second day. After that, they don't. They stay. Because, so much intense practice, eventually the mind does settle down. That's one way of doing it, and it works. But I think it will only probably, for most people, work within a group context. Because very few people would have the determination on their own to sit right, right from the start for 10 hours a day doing meditation practice. Within a group context, then you have the group energy, plus you have the fact that you can't just get up and walk out. You have to sit there, and eventually the mind, trying to think of every way out of here, can't find anywhere, so then it just settles down, right? Okay, look at the sensations coming up and down. What the hell?
In the beginning, you talk about solid truth and what? In doing or in doing?
Say that again, sorry.
You talk in the beginning
about
solid truth and another word. I didn't understand the third word.
I don't remember, to tell you the truth. I'm sorry. Enduring?
What is enduring?
Enduring means it keeps going. Okay, thank you. Yes, enduring means it keeps constant going. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. It keeps going. Yeah, so something solid and enduring means that it is solid and it keeps on. It never finishes. Okay? So we're back to Vipassana. One way is this method of really immersing oneself in a practice for, and just not allowing the, however much the mind initially fights against it, it's trapped and it can't go out. So eventually it will of itself, like an animal, which first of all is crazy trying to get out of a restricted cage, eventually it just calms down. And so this works. And this is why many people are very interested in Vipassana practice, because it does give you a real taste of how to practice. The other way is to do it by simply relaxing the mind and keeping the sessions much more short, but at the same time keeping the mind very open and spacious. Then if the mind is kept very open and spacious, and the sessions are not too long, but while one is on the session, even though the mind is spacious, it's at the same time very focused, then again the mind will cooperate and gradually the sessions can become longer and longer. So this is, on the whole, the Mahamudra approach, that you do many sessions but you keep them short, so that that the mind then wants to cooperate. You see, once the mind decides it definitely wants to cooperate, then that's the point. It's very important. Taming the mind really means that we get the mind to want to do what we want it to do, and that we're not fighting with ourselves. That the mind settles down and decides, yes, this, when we do something we enjoy doing, we do it. Isn't it? We don't have to fight against it. So, as I say, there is these two approaches. Either you, by just determination, that you sit there and eventually the mind will settle down, or else by doing it in a much more relaxed fashion, many sessions more short, and then the mind begins to recognize that actually this is a nice thing to do. It's very important that we get the mind wanting to do something, because as with anything, for example, I had a friend who had a son who was, when I first knew the boy, he was about 10 years old, and he loved the Spanish guitar. He was an Australian boy, but he really loved Spanish guitar. So he would practice for hours and hours every day. Apart from going to school and doing his homework, the rest of the time he was practicing guitar. Nobody made him, nobody forced him, but he loved it. So for him, what looked to the rest of us like a lot of hard work, to him was such a joy. Isn't it? So then, of course, eventually he became a very brilliant guitarist, obviously. So this is the point, that if we enjoy doing something, it's not an effort. People who go into long-term retreats, people think, oh, very difficult, oh, how can you do that? But to the person concerned, it's a joy. So the first thing is that taming the mind really means that the mind befriends the practice. It befriends the path. We become a friend with the mind, and the mind itself wants to do this. We're not, it's not fighting against it, thinking of everything else it needs to do instead of. So this takes time. It takes some people naturally love to meditate right from the start. For other people it's difficult, in which case either, as I say, you do a total immersion, like in a Vipassana course, or else you take it slowly, but keep doing it. But the important thing is to get the mind to, like a horse that has been tamed, to really be interested in the training. Because if we like to do something, it comes easily for us. And even the difficulties don't seem like difficulties. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is a very fundamental thing, that we really have to have the interest and the enthusiasm, which comes from getting a mind which is... So this is why shamatha is emphasized first, because then we have a mind which is quieter, more focused. When our mind becomes a little quiet and focused, actually joy arises. And when joy arises within us, then naturally the mind thinks, oh, that's nice. Hey, I can do that. Even just the taste of having a well-tamed mind, we experience a kind of inner release and as I say, this kind of inner joy inside it comes. And then that encourages us. It's very important that we, all of us, understand that we can do this. That it's not just, the Milarepas of the world who could do it. We don't need maybe to fly, not so important. But we really can tame our mind. And never was it more important than in this day and age, where everything goes towards having an untamed mind. So this understanding that the mind can calm down, can be focused, can experience a kind of inner spaciousness is very important.
It brings back in my mind the first sentence. Then who is the one that tames the mind?
Very good question. Who is the one who tames the mind? The point is that, in actual fact, until we reach very advanced stages on the path, we are going to take our ego with us. All of this talk about taming the mind, about cultivating the qualities of kindness, loving kindness, and compassion, of eradicating negative qualities, and so forth, of developing patience and ethics and generosity, all of this is not pointing, is not directed at the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind doesn't have to be told to be generous or ethical or develop loving kindness. It's the ego that needs to be trained. So this horse of the mind is still the egoic mind. And so it's, in a way, the ego which is training the ego in order to go beyond the ego. I mean, Buddhism doesn't usually talk about it that way, but if we look at it, in fact, from the Theravadan point of view, we take our sense of self with us until we become an arahat, or into nirvana. And from the Mahayana point of view, until one becomes an 8th level bodhisattva. So the fact is that we are dealing first with our conventional self and trying to get the conventional self purified and tamed so that it can walk the path to its own dissolution. From the start, it has never really existed, but from the point of view of our ignorance, it seems very real. So we are dealing with conventional truth here, relative truth. This is not absolute truth. This is not the Heart Sutra. This is our relative truth, because this is where we exist, it seems, to ourselves. And so what we are trying to do is to purify the self to go beyond the self. Of course, as I say, the self from the very beginning has never existed, but nonetheless, where we are here, it looks very real. And so in order to really come to a realization of how things really are, we have to start from where we are now. From time to time we look up at the Himalayas, but in fact most of us are not even on base camp. So we have to walk the path that is before us at this moment. And so most of the path is dealing with us locked in our state of unknowing, our state of ignorance. But it's a path which will lead more and more to the, the dissolution of our basic ignorance. It's like a lump of salt, which gradually, it dissolves more and more and more. And then you can't find that lump of salt anymore. So, that's the thing, is that, on the relative level, which is where we, mostly our minds are, then we are, it's basically, but at the same time, it should be remembered that our impulses of joy, of calm, of generosity and kindness and love and compassion, which spontaneously arise within us, are echoes of our true nature. It's calling us, so to speak, to come back to where we have never really left. These qualities are innate within us. And so sometimes they just arise spontaneously. And it's like it's a call back to our true nature again. So are there any other questions at this point? Yes. Okay.
You said that the nature of the mind is like space without boundaries. And this is a thing I can understand easily on physical level. There is no difference between this atom and this atom. It's a part of the same continuum, the same thing. But mentally, are all mental continuums one of the same continuum?
The mental continuum is individual, but the ultimate consciousness has no center and no boundaries. Right? I mean, if you consider the mental continuum, which is our ordinary conceptual thinking, then you have your conceptual thinking, Boaz has his conceptual thinking, right? This is what keeps us, making us think we're all very individual. But the ultimate nature of the mind, which is so you have clouds, and all individual little clouds, but behind that is the sky. And that is what cannot really be divided.
So all of our nature of the minds are the same nature of the mind?
Essentially, yes. That's why we all have Buddha nature. It's not like everybody, you have a little Buddha, you have a little Buddha, you have a little Buddha. We all have little Buddhas inside us. It doesn't mean that. And this is why when, for example, one does deity practice or guru yoga, right? At the end, when you see the guru or the deity, they melt into light, and then they're absorbed through the top of the head down into one's heart, and one says, the deity or the guru's mind, our own mind, are the same like water into water, right? So this is the same idea, that ultimately that is you can't say water and water. Water is water, right? It doesn't mean that then one gets this kind of, what can I say, like this kind of cosmic consciousness that everybody's minds, but, and that, you kind of blank out into a kind of zombie state. But it's a state which goes beyond the duality. You see, our conceptual mind naturally has the duality of self and other, right? That's the sine qua non of the dualistic state of our conceptual thinking, is there's me and there's everything which is not me. In the state of primal awareness, that just doesn't come into it. That division, that natural, that dualistic thinking just isn't there. So we just see things as they really are, rather than making all these divisions between self and other. So it's very simple. It's very what can I say? It's very naked. I'm sure, if you really practice and look, you will recognize it, and then you will see that what I'm trying to say. Because anything one says is immediately conventional language, so then, but if it's all one, then... But it's not one, it's not many. It's beyond all those dualistic conceptions. But it doesn't mean that it's fantastic lights, and trumpets. It's something so simple. It's more simple. And our minds can't take it. It's too simple for the mind. And this is why in all the great religions of the world, the spiritual traditions, not the religions. Religions are a big problem. But the genuine spiritual traditions of all the world have always said that ultimate reality cannot be spoken about. Anything you say about God, it's not that. Right? Because the minute we speak of something, we bring it down to the level of language and conceptual thinking, and we've lost it. It's something which can be... The Buddha hardly spoke about nirvana. And the reason was, he sometimes said, it's the unconditioned, the unborn, the unmade, etc. But basically he hardly spoke about it. Nirvana being the nature of the mind. Because anything we say about it, we immediately just grasp it and bring it down to our conceptual level, right? He said, when you realize it, that's enough. So this is the path to jump off. Right? That far you can take you to the edge of the chasm. Then you have to jump. And then you won't say, you'll go, emaho. Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. Yes. Yes. Just a minute. She's saying that I had said before that spontaneous manifestations of kindness and good qualities, etc., are echoes of our Buddha nature.
My question is, sometimes when I get these glimpses, I have the feeling that this is the ego too. Can you elaborate?
So she feels that sometimes when she gets these glimpses, she feels that that is also the ego. Well, of course, the ego often takes over very quickly. And this is always our problem. I mean, it's also a problem with recognizing the nature of the mind, because in a moment we can suddenly the clouds open, but then immediately the ego jumps in and says, "Aha, got it! Right now now I know," and it's all gone. So likewise with these innate impulses towards goodness, which do come from the nature of the mind, then immediately the ego grasps onto it and makes it its own. But don't worry, relax. Relax, it doesn't matter, that's fine. I mean, actually while we are still in a very unenlightened state, as I say, we have to befriend our ego. in order to go beyond the ego. We have to have a healthy, balanced... Okay, according to this Chittamatra system of Buddhism, which was the third turning of the wheel. The first turning of the wheel was the basic Shravakayana schools, such as nowadays we have with the Theravadan schools. The second turning of the wheel was what is called the middle way of Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, the Madhyamaka. The third turning of the wheel was exemplified in Asanga and Vasubandhu and emphasizes Buddha nature and the sutras which deal with Buddha nature. Now, Asanga, in the third turning of the wheel, oh, it's for you. Okay. I was thinking, okay, the Chittamatra system, which means mind only, or the Yogacara system, the way of yoga. The Chittamatra system posits 8 consciousnesses. So all Buddhist schools have 6 consciousnesses. That is the 5 sense consciousness, eyes, ears, nose, and so forth, and the 6th, which is the mental consciousness. The Chittamatra system posits a further 2 consciousnesses. Now, so you have the 6th consciousness, which is our conceptual mind consciousness. Then you have jumping, you have the 8th consciousness. Because the question is, if, as in our 6th consciousness, thoughts are momentary, going like this, then where are our memories? I know what I did this morning. I know what I did 5 minutes ago. I know what I did 10 seconds ago. Where is that stored? How, when I memorize something, can I then recall it again? Things which we remembered when we were children, we still know it. Where is that? And also all our karmic seeds, all our intentional actions of body, speech and mind in this lifetime and from a Buddhist perspective many lifetimes before, where does karma reside? Where is all that kept? And in the Chittamatra system, therefore, they posit the idea of an 8th consciousness called the Alaya Vijnana, or the store consciousness. Alaya just means like a storeroom, as in Himalaya. Himalaya means a store of Hima, snow. And so it's the word, the Sanskrit word for a store. So in Tibetan, this was not translated as store, it was translated as kunji, which means an all basis or a substratum. It's the substratum consciousness. But anyway, if you think of it like an ocean, then on top you have the surface waves. That is the ordinary conceptual 6th consciousness. Then you go down and down and down and down through the ocean, you know, and inside there are so many different kind of beings living in that ocean, you know, beautiful fish and dolphins and sharks and all sorts of weird things living down at the bottom there. And then you get the bottom, where everything filters down and it stays at the bottom of the ocean. So the bottom of the ocean is the substratum or store consciousness. Not to complicate things, but it has 2 aspects. One is ultimate reality and one is relative. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's where everything stays, right? So you have the 6th surface consciousness and you have the base consciousness. And between them, you have the 7th consciousness. Now, the 7th consciousness acts like a bridge between the 8th consciousness and the 6th consciousness. And it is said that there resides the sense of I. the ego, in the seventh consciousness. And so this is called the Klishtamano Vijnana. Klishtamano means an afflicted consciousness. It's afflicted because it is the root of ignorance, because this is where the idea of a self comes from. But it is karmically neutral because this afflicted consciousness, this sense of I, can be associated with negative roots, greed and attachment and anger and so forth, envy, pride, all that. Or it can be allied with positive mental states, generosity, kindness, loving kindness, compassion, all this. So it goes either way, karmically. It's not in itself karmically negative insofar as karma is created by the sense of ego. Right? So therefore, the ego, the sense of I, can be also a positive thing. It's based in ignorance, but nonetheless, for as long as it's going, it's what is going to be walking the path. Until finally, through insight, through wisdom, we see into its inherent empty nature. Does that make sense? Yeah?
The motivation also is made there, no?
Mm?
The motivation from the action is also made there in this present layer?
Well, no, the Buddha said that karma is intention. So that means that whatever we think or say or do, the karmic results of that are based on the underlying motivation or intention, not just the action itself, but the reason why we perform that action, not the one we give to ourselves to justify ourselves, but the real reason why, what state of mind was there that caused us to think or say or do whatever we did. That will flavor, that will color the karmic fruits, not just the action, but why we did it.
Returning to the first question about consciousness being discrete, in the sense that we all have different consciousnesses, even
Yes.
though it's all pervasive and boundless. But at the same time, we understand, or we're told that that if you can achieve Buddhahood, that the Buddha himself becomes all-knowing, first of all, throughout all time, past, present, and future, and also for all other beings as well, what is going on inside them. It makes one think that there is some kind of ability for one consciousness to penetrate another in that sense. Can you expand on that?
I don't know how to sum that up. I mean, basically what he's saying is that according to the traditional texts, at the time of full enlightenment, becoming a Buddha, then a Buddha is all-knowing, he's omniscient, which means that he understands and penetrates the minds of all beings in the universe. And so in this way, this would indicate that indeed the nature of the mind is all-penetrating. Yes. Of course, the question always is...
my question was, if it's discrete, does it seems to be an anomaly. How can it be discrete on one side and at the same time be able to penetrate other discrete forms of consciousness?
Well, because, I mean, the nature of the mind is not discrete. I mean, the nature of the mind is all-pervading. It's the conceptual relative mind stream which is discrete. it's that is individual. You know, your thoughts, your thoughts, your thoughts, your thoughts. The nature of the mind transcends all those boundaries. So if you are always within that nature, then that's why if you go to see like a great master, they know what you're thinking. And I mean, to my mind, a genuine master is one who understands us much better than we understand ourselves, because they see very deeply into our whole nature in a way that we ourselves are very blinkered. So this is why we trust them to be able to guide us, because we recognize that actually they know us much better than we know ourselves. And certainly they can, I mean, a great master can definitely see into your mind. I mean, just as a... one time, I was my Lama Kamtu Rinpoche's secretary. And so one time I was sitting there at my typewriter typing away. And he said, you know, women's minds are very interesting. Yes, Rinpoche. And he said, no, he said, you know, the way you think, the way we think, we start here and we go round and we get there. And the way you think, you start there and somehow you go a completely different route. You usually arrive at the same place, but you've gone there a very different route. He said, no, it's not just that you're Western, because I've seen Western males and their minds more or less follow the same route that mine does, but yours goes in a very different route. He said, it's so interesting. He said, it's not that it's better or it's worse, but it's different. So I thought, oh, there I am, sitting typing, and Rinpoche is sitting there looking at how my mind works. But I mean, that's the point. I mean, and that's why they're your Lama, is because you recognize that they actually see your mind much better than you can see your mind. And out of their great compassion, they are therefore able to guide us. Isn't it? Why I'm not a Lama? You know, people say, why don't you take students? Why aren't you a Lama? And I say, because I know what a genuine Lama is. And I'm not that. Mm-hmm.
As well, so you know, I understand that it's separate from the I and the ego, and that there's no fixed I. You know,
Let's get this far. So the star consciousness retains all the seeds from this lifetime and past lifetimes.
so there must, what I'm getting at is that there must be some sort of continuous energy.
Oh yes,
You know, because what is reincarnation?
yes.
There must be something which is sort of I.
No, it's the thing is, she's saying, so then therefore then if we are, you know, as I understand it, if the alaya is therefore connected with all our past lives, then, you know, basically what is going on, and there must be therefore an I which makes the continuity. The fact is that what it's saying is that yes, there is a stream of consciousness. That's the one thing which does go on. But it's not something which is static and solid and unchanging, which is how we see our sense of I. It is something like a river which is endlessly flowing. You know, so you look at the river and you say, oh, the river yesterday and the river today is the same river, but actually there's nothing in it which is the same. Right? All the water in it has changed, but you can say there's a river.
So it's energy.
Yes, it's an energy. Yeah, yeah, Exactly. I mean, it just, when we die, what is said is that, of course, obviously we leave the body behind. And we leave the present personality behind. But the consciousness flows on. I mean, if one saw oneself in one's last lifetime, one wouldn't recognize oneself. If one sees oneself in one's future life, one wouldn't recognize oneself. If one could meet one's future lifetime, one wouldn't know, who's that? We might have changed gender, changed race, changed everything. I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, you might not even be human. And so in this lifetime, yes, we're playing the role we're playing, and, one should play it as well as one can. But just recognize it's just a role, that you change roles all the time. But that same stream, that's what we take with us. Our consciousness carries on. Mm-hmm. I don't think that you can say who is, because the whole what is. What started it all off? Who knows? I mean, the Buddha, when he was asked, what started this all off, would always say, don't even bother to ask, just work out how you can get out of it. Because from a Buddhist point of view, it's all a cycle. So it's not a straight line, like this was the beginning and this is the end. It's going round and round and round. So it's not just this particular world cycle, but also, past world cycles. I mean, you're dealing with eons and eons and eons of time. At what point the pure nature of the mind split into a sense of self-consciousness, who knows? But it happens moment to moment to moment also. It's not something which is within time. I don't think it has a purpose, except that now that we're here, our purpose is to recognize that we are imprisoned in samsara and find the key to get out, and then help others also to get out. I don't think there's any great cosmic plan. Here we all are, trapped. And so the question is not who or why, but how to get out. It's 11 o'clock. Am I supposed to stop at 11? Well, it's a yoga time now. No, time is an illusion. There is always a fourth dimension. But I mean, the point is that, as soon as we start asking how and why, then we are just caught again in the conceptual mind. Because from the very beginning we have never been trapped and we have never been imprisoned. And it's all a part of this ego projection that we are caught. I mean, I think indeed once one genuinely gets a deep realization of the nature of the mind, one recognizes that since the beginning there's been no problem. This is what the Heart Sutra is all about, reminding us that there is no problem. It's just that we are creating this movie. As soon as the movie ends, then we recognize that from the beginning there was no movie. I mean, what we have to understand is that we are all caught up in the conceptual mind, which by its very nature is deluded. So we do not see things how they really are. So everything that we say, every word I speak, is ultimately not true. Right? If we were seeing it from an ultimate point of view, you'd realize this is just a lot of mindless chatter. But as long as we are trapped in our conceptual thinking, then it has some provisional meaning. But it doesn't have ultimate meaning. Ultimately, none of this has any meaning at all. Yes, you understand? I mean, please understand it, that this is why, there can be many spiritual paths, because all spiritual paths are just provisional teaching to get us to a point which goes beyond all of that. We're not talking about truth. We're just talking about the way things, how we can organize things and understand it from the point of our very limited ordinary consciousness, which is by its very nature deluded. So however much we argue or disagree or agree, it's all ultimately it's all irrelevant.